Okay, hello there, and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph, and I am the host of this show, a show that's dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock music. So it's a Sunday night, second Sunday, since I received this album. So this is Ben's Album Challenge. So for those of you who are not sure what that is, Ben, who's a subscription person, a person that follows me, we've talked it over, and he's giving me an album, and every 2 weeks I'm going to review that album. So it's like a challenge for me, so that's why we call it Ben's Album Challenge. So the first one that I did was, now it's completely gone out of my head. Oh yes, the first one I did was the Journey album, which I had an interesting feeling about it. I didn't really like the album at first, and then it grew on me. And at the end, I didn't mind it, and there was one track on there I liked quite a bit, actually. This album is, I've listened to, so the new album, so that you know what we're dealing with, is Queensryche Empire. So I actually own this album, as you can see here, otherwise I wouldn't be able to show you. I'm just going to straighten this a bit because there's a lot of crap in it. What the hell? Oh, it's a pen, that's what it is. I'm making it all lopsided. Okay, so there, that's better now. So anyways, Ben gave me this album a couple weeks ago. I actually have the album and had listened to it at least once before he had actually given it to me, and I've listened to it 4 more times since, including today when I listened to it and critiqued it a bit. I have to say that my first initial listen to it before he had actually knew about the album and had given it to me, I didn't really like it. To me, I just listened to it background while I was cleaning and stuff, and I just heard nothing but superficial stuff. But each listen to after that, since he's given it to me, I've heard more stuff. This is a pretty, how do you want to say it? Pretty in-depth album. There's a lot of stuff here that you don't hear the first time you hear it. It's a well put together album, I believe. The other thing about this group that I didn't know, and I had preconceived ideas, as I do with every album that I get to, but some I have more than others. This one, I had this feeling they were like a serious heavy metal band, but I don't get that feel from them. I don't even know if I would classify them as heavy metal, to be honest with you. Hard rock, certainly, and there are some elements of heavy metal here. Some of the songs are probably bordering on heavy metal. But overall, I don't have that feeling about them as being a heavy metal band. I think of them as being a kind of hard rock band. After I'd listened to them a couple times, my initial feeling was that they had that kind of hair metal sound that you got in the 80s, but heavier. So but much better instrumentation than you would get from a lot of those hair metal bands in the 80s. I know there's people that don't like that term, but I know that there's other terms to use. That's just the way I thought of it, because that's the time period I grew up in, and that's the way I thought of them. So I kind of thought of this as being a little bit of the same, and I looked at the picture of the guys, and they look like a hair metal band, but they're much more than that. They have a lot more depth to their music, and it's much heavier than most hair metal bands. So after a couple of times listening to it, I began to realize that my original perception of it as being a somewhat hair metal-ish kind of uninteresting album was erroneous. So now we got to the point where I've listened to this, the last couple times I've listened to it, I kind of like it a bit. I've grown to like it a bit. I don't know if this will ever be something that I listen to a lot of, but I appreciate a lot of what I'm hearing here. So there's 11 tracks on the album. So some of the basic things I want to say about the album is that it's fairly heavy. Overall, I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10 in heaviness, it's probably like a 7. So it's not super heavy, and it's not super fast like you get with a lot of speed metal bands or super grindy like you get with a lot of really thrash metal bands and stuff like that. But it does have a heavy element to it. The instrumentation is better than I originally thought. I think the guitar player is very good. Bass player is pretty predominant for a bass player. I think he's pretty strong. Drummer, I'm not sold on as much. I think he's a little bit more in the background. He may be better than than I'm hearing, but he's a little bit more backgroundish, so you don't hear him as much. Vocalist is very smooth, has an excellent voice, very strong. And I think this is the Tate, if I'm thinking of it. I think his name is Tate. I can't think of his first name right now. Who a lot of these sites talk about, and he's well liked. He has a very good vocal range. At least I think it's him. That if he's doing all the vocal parts, he has some deep parts and some middle range parts and some very high parts. He has a very good vocal range, and his voice is very smooth. There's not a lot of breaking or cracking in his voice at all. I sense a real smooth transition, and the album, of course, helps that because it's well produced and the production is good on this album. So the tracks, like I said, there's 11 tracks on this album. My ratings were mostly at the beginning. The first 5 tracks I only gave like a 5, and one of them got a 6. And then the bottom 6 tracks were all 6 or better, except for one track which I only gave a 5. So we had 3 6s, 2 7s, and a 5. So Ben has asked me also to include my favorite track from the album. So I have kind of a tie here between 2 tracks, and they're very different. One of them is Empire. I gave that a 7, and the other one is Silent Lucidity. I also gave that a 7, but they're very different tracks. They're not too much alike. Okay, so some other things I've noticed on the album. There's times when he's singing that he kind of has, I hear Rick Emmett. I hear a Rick Emmett sound in his voice. He doesn't actually sound like Rick Emmett, but there's a sound quality that he has in his voice that reminds me almost immediately of Rick Emmett. It may be the style in which he's singing lends to that connection between the two. I think he isn't Rick Emmett has a more prominently high voice overall, and that may be just the way he sings, than this guy has. This guy has ability to go up and down quite a bit. And when he's down, like when his voice is deeper, it doesn't sound like him at all. And when he gets too high, his voice doesn't sound like him either. It's just that that range where he falls in the Rick Emmett range where he kind of has that Rick Emmett sound. And there's a few songs on here with that. The guitarist, I think, is very good. He does a fair number of solos, but I never get this kind of feeling from him when he's doing his solos that they're out of place. You know, some guitar players, the song will be going along and all of a sudden this guitar solo will come out of nowhere. It doesn't really fit in where they put it, or it doesn't really fit the song, or it seems like a jam session's about to break out, or that they've just thrown this guitar solo in to show you how good this guy is. You know, I don't get any of that here. What I get here is a guy who fits his guitar solos to the song. They're appropriate. Some of them are really good. Some of them are just kind of melodical. A perfect guitar player, I think, for a band of this style. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about the tracks themselves. Best I Can, which is the opening track. Very good vocals on this song. Excellent guitar riff. The song overall is not all that memorable to me, so I only gave it a 5 because there's nothing on this particular track that really strikes me as being unusual. It fits in with the album, flows with the album. It's not a bad song though. The next song, The Thin Line, kind of a little bit better than the first song as far as I'm concerned. I gave it a little bit of a higher rating. Pretty heavy bass part in it, and I liked that quite a bit. and the vocals and the bass part kind of go together at the beginning, which sounds kind of different. It's not something I'm used to hearing, but it was good. And the guitar has that sound that this guy likes to have, and I think it's more of a modern sound to the guitar. It doesn't have that 70-ish sound or 80-ish sound. It's a more melodic kind of high but background type of guitar. I'm not really sure if I'm explaining it right. I've heard this before from other groups, not really figured out what to call it yet, but really pretty strong guitar player here. The next song, Jet City Woman, heavy bass at the onset, and this is not an uncommon thing for them. They like that bass player right in there. Guitar solo is really good. This is the first song on the album where I kind of get that kind of bit of a hint of Rick Emmett. That's when I first started to think about it. I thought, oh, wow, there's some similarity there. But overall, the song is a bit unmemorable. I kind of think of this as being the hair metal song of the album. It isn't a hair metal song because it's much better than most hair metal songs, but it just gives me that feeling. Okay, Delta Brown is next. That's the fourth track. Has some noises at the beginning, some car noises followed by a heavy bass. It's kind of an intro. So they've done 3 songs now at this point that have a heavy bass intro. Guitar is a little bit more in the background here, as well as the solo, but comes through a little bit more as the song goes along. And some nice backing vocals here too. And I don't know if the lead vocalist does the lead vocals and then does overdubbing tracks with the back vocals. But if he doesn't, then the backing vocals guys are pretty on the money here, I think. Okay, the next track, Another Rainy Night Without You. This is a bit of a hard rocker, fairly hard rocking song. There's a couple of points in the song where I hear Def Leppard. I hear a Def Leppard sound here. I don't think this song, at those part in the song, would be out of place on a Def Leppard album. I mean, when I'm talking about the earlier Def Leppard, not the Hysteria stuff. So, it could even be a little bit of a Pyromania thing too. So when I hear that, that's what I'm hearing. So those are the first 5 tracks. At this point, the album is average. I'm not really crazy about it. It's not something that I would listen to a lot of, but I recognize the individual parts that are good. So then it gets better after this. The back half of the album, which is somewhat unusual, usually the front half is better. The other thing with this album is it's a longer album, about 67 minutes. I come from a time period when 35 to 40 minutes was a good size album. When you start getting around 45, it's a little bit too much. So I'm trying to look at things a little different. The modern era, with the CDs being the way it is, people are able to write longer albums. So you don't get the 40-minute albums that you can only get on vinyl because there was no more room on the album. So I've adjusted a little bit to that. Okay, so the first song that comes, like, to me after the halfway point is the title track, Empire. Very heavy riffing here, and heavy guitar. There's more of that Rick Emmett feel I get here. His voice is deeper in this song as well than it has been on the other songs. This may be my favorite track on the album. I quite like this one a little bit. It gets a 7. I know people are saying, oh yeah, well, you don't really like it if it's only getting a 7. Hey, it's a 7. 7 is good. That's 20% higher than it would be if it was a mediocre. So it's 2 points higher than the average song on the album. That's good. To get 8, 9s, and 10s, that's not easy to get, But not for me. I mean, when I see a 7, that means that's a good start. That means that the album has a chance to go somewhere. If you get the 9 right off the hop, I'm going to tell you what happens when I give 9s and 10s right away. The song does really well for a couple of weeks, and then I never listen to it again because it burns itself out. A 7 is a much more preferable number for me because it gives room for this song to grow and become a classic song for me. Because the 9s and 10s rarely end up as classic songs for me. They usually end up burned out, and I never listen to them again, and I don't even think of them again. And that's my initial feeling about them. This song could end up as a 9 eventually, but it would take longer to get there. And I hope that's kind of explanation for you people to kind of grasp where I'm coming from here. Okay, the next song is called Resistance. Another heavy track. Some nice guitar on this as well. I hear a bit of a Sammy Hagar sound here too. Not a lot, but that little falsetto part that he does in the song, I've heard Sammy Hagar do that same thing. And I'm not a Sammy Hagar fan, trust me. I don't dislike him, but I'm not really a big fan of his. But I hear it here on this particular track. And it's one of the better tracks as well, I think. Then we come up to Silent Lucidity, which is the other song that it may end up being my favorite track. So if I got to give a favorite track for this album, it's probably Silent Lucidity right now. Empire would be very close though. It has a nice acoustic bit that I like a lot. The deep vocals are different than most of the album, and I like that too. And it's an interesting song, the way it weaves its way through. It's a song for me, I give a 7 now, but this is a song that could potentially become a classic for me. It has that potential to be there. So for this particular video and for this particular album on today, this will probably be my favorite song for the album. Okay, so we got 3 tracks left. The next one is probably the weak sister on the back half for me, Hand on Heart. A kind of Guns N' Roses opening. That little guitar bit at the beginning and riffing part at the beginning sounds like a Guns N' Roses opening to me. Maybe that hurt the song because I'm not a huge Guns N' Roses fan. However, it did change pretty radically after that, and the song got better as it went along. His voice is also deeper in this song as it was in the previous song, but I don't think I like this song as much as that one. I hate to say it, but I'm hugely influenced by negative and positive things. So something I hear that I really like will make a song better than it probably is. Something I don't like will probably hurt the song, and that opening part I didn't like. It just sounded like Guns N' Roses to me. Okay, so the 10th song on the album, One and Only, heavy riffing to open, then some soloing and some more riffing, and another Rick Emmett sound to his voice. This song has such a Rick Emmett sound to it. Also the guitars sound like a Triumph guitar set. Like, this song wouldn't be out of place on Progressions of Power, in my opinion. Like, it would fit in there, and I might not recognize right away that it wasn't a Triumph song. So a very, very interesting way in which they presented this. I just hear Triumph all over this particular track, maybe the most on this whole album. But a solid song. I gave it a 6. I'm not a huge fan of that aspect of Triumph, but I recognized it right away when I heard it. Okay, and then the last track on the album, Anybody Listening. Very melancholy track, very different than most of the rest of the songs on the album. And it moves into this kind of acoustic bit after the initial set of guitar and melancholy guitar sound. It then moves into this acoustic bit. And there's this kind of a twin vocals. So I'm thinking somebody else on the album sings, or they've overdubbed his voice twice. That could be possible. I'm not sure I'd have to read on it, and I haven't gotten to that part. But the song gets heavier as it goes along, and then it mellows out and gets heavier again. So it's a pretty good track. It's a nice ending to the album. So overall, this album for me, track by track, is pretty solid. I would say it would get at least a 6 overall. And that's pretty good for a band who has some things about it that aren't always pleasing to me. The kind of hair metal-ish thing, the Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses kind of in sound to it. But on the other hand, the Triumph and the Rick Emmett stuff also captured my interest, which made me listen to it more. So for me, the strengths of this album are its melodic sound. Its vocalist is very strong. Guitar guy is very organized and understands proper soloing and how to fit his solos to the song. Those three elements are really strong on this album. The music writing is good. The lyrics are good. The overall sound of the album is cohesive. Like, it doesn't sound jarry or like there's no songs on here that sound like they just plucked it in there and it doesn't really belong. It's all smooth, it runs smooth. But there is some differences too. Every tune doesn't sound the same either. And there are groups like that where you could plug in the title of any of their songs and they'd all sound the same. I don't get that here at all. I hear a common thread, but I hear little bits of differences to add changes to each song. And they play enough different type of instruments too to make it interesting. Bass player is strong. Guitar player is strong. I like to say the drummer was strong, but I think he's a little too far back for me to really get a read on him. And being a drummer, I usually notice these things fairly quickly. So overall, I would say I like it. I like it a lot more. If you'd asked me right at the beginning, I probably would have said, it's a hair metal band, I don't want to hear it. But it isn't a hair metal band, and I do like it. And it's grown on me. So that's part of the reason why we're doing this, is I want to show that each time you give an album a chance, you may hear something that you like, and it'll get stronger with you as it goes along. And that's happened to me many times, not just for an album, but for groups. Sometimes I get a song in my head by a group, and that every time I think of that group, I think of that song. And I may not like that song, and if I don't like that song, a lot of groups have suffered for a long time at not being able to make any impact on me because of that one song. I don't get that, and that here I've done what I said I would do, give it 4 or 5 listens before I actually say anything about it. So overall, pretty good album. I have it. I will probably play it on occasion. I don't think it's going to make my playlist right away, and I don't think that it will be like a super powerhouse album for me. But I think it's going to grow over time. And just to give you an instance, I absolutely didn't like Relayer when it first came out, the Yes album, Relayer. I didn't like it, and it took me a good 20 years to like the album. And in the last 20 years, it's steadily grown, and it's like bordering on a master album now. That's the kind of albums I want, because they last longer. They have more depth and more meaning, and you hear more from them because they grow on you. So they have some background to them. I'm not saying that this could be another Relayer, but it has potential. That's the part that I want to get across. So for Ben's album challenge tonight on Sunday night, and I do apologize, I realize it's going to come out late because it's a longer album, and critiquing it took longer than I wanted to. I had to eat first, and I've been doing stuff all day, so I'm kind of tired, but I enjoyed the album. I listened to it thoroughly, and if you're a person that likes hard rock bordering on heavy metal and you like strong vocals, this is a good album. It's a good album. I know that they have another one called Operation Mindcrime, which everybody says is their best. I don't know it. I haven't listened to it. But you'd have to be pretty strong to be better than this, I think. So anyways, there you have it. Queensryche Empire, the album of Ben's album challenge for this week. And Ben has sent me another album, which I looked at, but I haven't memorized anything about it yet, for the next challenge, which will take place in 2 weeks from now. I decided to keep it at a 2-week interval because a 1-week interval with all the stuff I'm doing doesn't give me enough time to really space out the listening. If I have to listen to it every day, I'm going to have a different reaction to the album by the time I do it on the Sunday. I might be just kind of sick of hearing it, and I don't want to give it. I want to give it its due. I don't want an album to suffer because of overkill, I guess is the best way. So spacing it out 2 weeks means I have 2 weeks to listen to it at my leisure and get to the point where I have tonight. And I think that's worked well. It worked well on the first one. It's worked well on this one, and hopefully it'll work well on the next one. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Ben's Album Challenge, and will enjoy the next one as well. So please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated, and we'll be back again with something else in the next day or so. So have yourself a good evening. Good night.